I don't have anything to say.
Well, I do, but it might not be interesting to anyone.
I have secrets inside of me and struggles, and I don't know if I'm ready to share them.
I want to hear what you have to say.
I want to speak of the deepest things together.
I want to hear what you dream about, what you hope for.
I want to know how you have come to arrive at this resting point in the journey.
What if I speak and you don't understand me?
I will listen and listen again until my hearing becomes understanding.
What if I can't find the words to share the world inside of me?
I believe that wise words will emerge from you.
How can I trust you to hold my life's stories? You who may not even know.
By knowing that as I receive part of your story, I will give you part of mine.
How will this work? What will happen? What awaits us?
We can find out anything by beginning. I'd like to share with you now a reading from Andy Catlett, Early Travels, a 2006 novel by Wendell Berry, part of a chapter called Misery. This story is set at the end of World War II. The house where my father's parents, Dory and Mars Catlett, spent their long marriage was not a happy one, though I was often happy in it. It was regulated by the seasonal order of all farmhouses of its time and shared in the comeliness of that order. Even so, it was not a happy house because my grandparents' marriage had been so often a collision of wills. Opposites attract, but this can only be within limits. And Grandma and Grandpa's story had the contending themes of attraction and conflict. To all of us younger ones in the family, and some who were not in it, Grandpa in his old age referred to Grandma as your mammy, thus acknowledging their fundamental difference. She, and not he, had borne their two sons, a fact that he held in awe. This was the honest, insoluble awe of a livestockman and farmer who had been preoccupied all his life with the fecundity of the world. She had borne their children, had suffered their births, and how far this set her apart from him. But in telling of a time he went to see her during their courtship, a time he returned to often in his last years, he would conclude, and your mammy came out to meet me, the prettiest formed little thing. He would gaze away, seeing her again as she was, and again he would be moved. Aye, Lord. Thus he acknowledged the attraction. Though she faced with candor the things that were, Grandma resisted and protested. Some things that were should not have been. I don't think Grandma ever reconciled herself to mortality, or for that matter, to humanity. Her mourning of her losses, which were ever on her mind, always involved an unrelenting objection. She objected to growing old, which she felt as a wrong imposed upon her. Oh, Andy, she would say to me, it's awful to get old. And she said this, I felt, pitying not only herself, but also the old man that I would one day be. Of humanity in general, she was skeptical. She had a few favorites, of whom I was one, but even of those she could be suddenly and peremptorily dismissive, unsurprised at any outrage they might commit. And yet, going wide of Christian charity and forgiveness as she sometimes did, she adhered to her church and served it. She was one of the pillars of the little white clapboard Bird's Branch church to which Grandpa did not adhere, and of which he was not a pillar. Like, I believe, a good many others of his kind, who like him defer to an unspecified deity called Old Marster in their ultimate knowing, Grandpa felt excluded, and perhaps, according to doctrines made to exclude him and his likes. And so religion had come between them. Grandpa told me once in the presence of Grandma, and for her benefit, that he was thinking of buying the church and tearing it down. This was a joke, surely, and just as surely a provocation, a blow dealt in an established conflict. Grandma replied, "Yes, I reckon you would." She was an infallible cook. Her kitchen and pantry and spokehouse and cellar were places of abundance. One of the happinesses of the place for me was in observing her intricate housewifery, her economizings and small savings, her mendings and patching. But she was never stingy with food. She put meals on the table that were luxurious. Grandpa's misery began to come upon him in the night. I would be asleep in a little metal bed in the corner of Grandma's bedroom upstairs when suddenly the whole house would fill with Grandpa's crying out from his folding bed down in the living room. His cries were the sounds, unmistakably, of misery. Oh, oh, oh. Grandma would get up. In her nightgown, barefooted, she would go out into the hall and down the stairs, turning on lights as she went, for by then the electric line had come. The cries would continue a while, and after a while, they would stop. And after a further while, Grandma would come back up the stairs to bed, turning the lights out as she came. I said nothing, but I never ceased to wonder. What was his misery, and how was it eased? I know that Grandpa enjoyed a drink of whiskey. He especially enjoyed a drink, as I have been told, if he had not paid for it himself. He saw nothing wrong with it in terms of his own thirst for it, which was limited. He could stop. He did not need to drink it all, as a friend of mine once said of himself, just to get rid of it. But Grandma, and I think this was another critical opposition, Grandma was a principled teetotaler. She belonged to the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and by temperance, she meant abstinence. Not a drop. None. And for this, she had substantial reasons. Her brother, whom we know as Uncle Peach, Grandpa's older brother Will, and my Uncle Andrew, who was her own firstborn son. Drinkers all, who could not stop, who did not know when to stop, or who did not want to stop. Uncle Peach, who managed to be an epical nuisance to everybody, including himself, capped his career one winter night with an impromptu nap in his front yard, from which several of his toes never awoke. I suppose, had she been less intelligent or less inclined to doubt, Grandma might have been fanatical on the subject of liquor. But she was no fanatic, and she could make do with what the world afforded. And so I can imagine her bringing the problem of Grandpa's misery to Doc Holston, who by then had the house next door to my parents' house in Hargrave. To do this, she would have had to face the scandal of Doc's boastful atheism. Doc was a small man who aspired to higher standing by looking down upon God. He would have been astonished to know that his blasphemy did not offend her nearly so much as his absurdity. Mars is having a terrible misery in the night. What can I do? Does he have the misery in the daytime? No, Why, damn it to hell, woman. When he wakes up that way, give him a drink. A drink? Of whiskey, damn it. Put a little water in it. Sweeten it a little if you want to. I can imagine her asking my father, because who else would she have asked, to get her a bottle of whiskey. She would have blushed. He would have laughed. An old white ribboner like you? What do you want it for? Such impudence would have made her secretive, in case I get a cold. So then I can see her on the nights of Grandpa's misery going down the stairs and straight back to the kitchen where she had hidden the bottle. For I know she would have hidden it. Grandpa, she said, could smell out candy and find it no matter how well she hid it. But he could not have smelled whiskey in a stoppered bottle, wiped clean, even though he would know she had hidden it somewhere. She would have poured the whiskey into a table glass with some water, perhaps a little sugar, and then holding it well away from her for the harm in it, determined to do good with it, she would have carried it to his bedside. Sit up, Mars. Drink this. He would not need to be invited twice. I can see her standing and watching as he drinks. After the first swallow, he says, "Aye, Lord." He drinks slowly, with pleasure. When he has finished, she takes the glass. He lies down, and she draws the cover over him. She sits down in the rocking chair by the bed, holding the empty glass, gazing away into her thoughts as she would often do. She sits by Grandpa, patting his arm, as she would have sat by a wakeful child, until he goes to sleep. That is my vision. I would like to think it might have happened so, and maybe it did. It is probable enough, credible enough. But what is the good of it? Perhaps none at all. But on my own now, from my imagination and my sorrow for them, I offer them nonetheless, out of time, this wish.
I'm going to read you a short snippet from a children's chapter book about a girl named Mary Ellen, who is 9 years old in 1954. And she is one of many children, ranging in age from older teenagers down through toddlers. And their mom, during World War II, had worked as a supervisor in an aircraft assembly plant. And she leaves to go to the airport to pick up two of her friends, childless friends from New York City, who are coming for a reunion with people that they work with at the plant. And while they're gone, one of Mary Ellen's older sisters is off at a piano lesson, and the other one is getting ready for her boyfriend to come and pick her up. And the mom tells the younger kids to please remember and take the brownies out of the oven before she gets back from the airport. Mary Ellen gets a great idea that she's going to paint their front door red to impress her mom's friends by making their house stand out and be different from all the other houses that are just alike in the suburbs where they live. And things do not exactly go according to plan. Just then, everything happened at once. Beverly, who had been dipping her empty popsicle stick into the paint can, Beverly is one of Mary Ellen's younger sisters, and painting her fingernails red, stopped and looked up. "Ellie," she asked, "what's that smell?" Mary Ellen turned and saw smoke billowing out of the kitchen door, just as her older sister Caroline came running up the driveway from her piano lesson, waving her piano music and shouting, "Ellie, the brownies, they're burning!" Joan, rushing out to see what the fuss was, Joan is the older sister who is waiting for her boyfriend to pick her up, flung open the front screen door and knocked Mary Ellen backward on her roller skates. Oh, I forgot to mention that Mary Ellen decided to wear roller skates while she's painting the front door red. As Mary Ellen fell over Scooter, the dog, and landed bottom first in a bush, red paint went flying, all over her, all over the front stoop, and all over Jerry's white tennis shorts and shirt. Jerry is Joan's boyfriend. "Hey!" exclaimed Jerry. "Oh no!" shrieked Joan. Tom, one of Mary Ellen's younger brothers, making siren noises and clanging the bell on his fire truck, pedaled to the kitchen door and turned on the hose. He squirted water through the kitchen screen door, trying to put out the fire in the oven like a fireman. Beverly, another of Mary Ellen's younger siblings, put up her hands, which were covered in red paint, and wailed. Mikey, another one of Mary Ellen's younger siblings, unperturbed, picked up the paintbrush and began painting red stripes on Scooter the dog, who didn't seem to mind. And it was at this exact moment that Mrs. Larkin, their mother's car, pulled into the driveway, horn honking. Honk, honk, to announce its happy arrival. "Mom!" Joan, Caroline, Mary Ellen, Beverly, and Tom yelled at the top of their lungs. "Fire!" yelled Jerry. "Paint!" yelled Mikey. "Aroo!" howled Scooter, not to be left out of the ruckus. "Aroo! Aroo! Aroo!" The car screeched to a stop, and Mrs. Larkin and her friends Betty and Florence jumped out. "What's going on?" Mrs. Larkin shouted over and above all the noise. "Oh, my stars, look at this mess! How on earth did this happen?" Suddenly, everyone was quiet. None of them had ever seen Mom this mad before. Even Scooter was cowed and maintained a dignified silence. Mary Ellen stepped forward. At this moment, she certainly had her mother's undivided attention, and oh boy, did she ever wish she didn't. "Mom," she began. Her voice sounded as wobbly as her knees felt. "I was only trying to paint the door. I didn't mean to make a mess. I'm sorry." I feel that this sums up the experience of having young children and being a mom to young children.
Give me potatoes.
Two of the happiest days in my life were the days I brought my newborn babies, Karen and Eric, home from the hospital. I was and still am very happy to be a mother.
My mother, Ruth, grew up on a Nebraska farm in the early 20th century. There she learned to be a practical, down-to-earth, hard-working, common-sense woman. She was both quiet and strong, frugal and generous, firm, yet very patient and loving. I never heard her gossip or utter a swear word. She and her 5 siblings scattered across the country during and after World War II, but they always stayed in touch through letters and rare visits, and the memories of those farm days together were strong. When my mother was 92, we took her across the country to visit her remaining 4 brothers and sisters, the last time she would see most of them, and they happily strained their hearing-aided ears to reminisce. When Ruth was nearly 98, we took her to a cousin reunion in Nebraska and visited the site of the old farm. She was in the mid-stages of dementia by then, but she thoroughly enjoyed the attention everyone gave her and looking at the old photos that everyone brought. I will always remember when we went to the farm site, her eyes lighting up when she said, "That looks like the barn my father built."
If you've been going to our beverages and banter gatherings, or even paying just a tiny bit of attention to our online services lately, you probably know that I've been really enamored with Wendell Berry of late. I've always loved his essays and poems, which feel really connected to the natural world, which makes sense considering his long life on the farm. And even though he has never publicly mentioned even knowing about our shared faith, so far as I know, there's something about him that feels Unitarian Universalist. His respect for everyone, his loving observations, his social awareness. I'm embarrassed to say that I've only recently discovered that he is also a prolific novelist. He's published well over 1,000 pages in novels and short stories about the tiny fictional town of Port William, Kentucky, and its people, set over the course of 90 years or so, beginning in the Civil War, when they were deeply divided, being on the border of the North and South. What I love about the book, from which I took the story I shared earlier, is that it's told from the perspective of a descendant of one of the main families featured in the book. The narrator is someone who knows these people. He's from them. He is them. And he is that place. The narrator, Andy Catlett, could easily be Wendell Berry himself. Mr. Berry is the same age as Andy and came from a similar kind of place with a similar kind of family. And the stories he tells come from a place of love, respect, and abiding curiosity about the effect we all have on one another. He loves people for who they are. By he, I mean Wendell Berry or Andy Catlett. I'm not quite sure. What I am sure of, because I know the experience of writing, is that there's a bit of the writer's life in every work of fiction. There are two other stories in the book that I'd like to share briefly, if only in description. Andy talks of his love for one of his father's farmhands, Dick Watson. Andy, at the time, is white and about 10. Dick is black and about 60. Andy is vulnerable in sharing his shame and confusion over racism and the benefits he had of being white and the prejudice experienced daily by his friend. You know, in 1968, Berry wrote a book of nonfiction called The Hidden Wound about racism and its effect on racists. It's been called by scholar Jess Rowe, author of White Flights, Race, Fiction, and the American Imagination, an exercise in vulnerability, or white anti-fragility. Berry, in that book, is teaching other people how to face their own role in systemic racism without getting defensive. In the way I see it, his portrayal of Dick as a kind of bonus parent to Andy gives them each a glimpse into a world they might not otherwise have seen. Two other characters are Ernest and Naomi Russet, an old couple, you know, my age, mid-50s, who as newlyweds wanted children. Their desire turned into hope, which suddenly became fear, which slowly morphed into sadness, and finally acceptance of the fact that they would have no biological heir to leave their well-tended and successful farm to, until they found Tom Coulter, a young man rejected by his own father, who was beaten down by loss. Ernest and Naomi take Tom in and quickly treat them as their own son. Theirs is a story that reminds us that we make family wherever we can find it, especially among those whose values we share. It's a reminder that mother isn't just the person who cooks and cleans. She isn't even the one who must accept us just as we are, loving us unconditionally. Mothers and fathers ideally are the ones who see what we can be and offer the guidance, wisdom, and expectation of accountability to make us so. I'm not a parent. Not being a parent is really the only regret I have in my life. Well, aside from the stupid tattoo I have on my left arm. When I was younger, in my teens, 20s, and even into my 30s, I was foolish enough to believe what I heard repeated all around me. That people like me couldn't be parents. And even if we managed to make parenthood happen in whatever way possible, we'd never live long enough to guide a young life into adulthood. A different pandemic was raging then. Its horrors played out on the news every night with healthy doses of judgment and righteousness. One day it occurred to me, I will live a life as long and productive as the lives of my parents and their parents before them. It would just look different, more like the life of Ernest and Naomi Russet, and less like the life of Marsh and Dory Catlett. It would be up to me to make it as love-filled as the lives of my parents and my grandparents. So I started seeing children in my life differently. Not just the children of my siblings, but also other children. Children of close friends. And children whose parents had abandoned them physically or emotionally. They all became my nieces and nephews, and I began to relish the role I could and did and continue to play in their lives. They're part of me, and I'm part of them, part of the story of who they are and who they're becoming. Something amazing happened a few years ago. In my one-to-one conversations with members and friends of East Shore, as I was getting to know you all, a common theme made itself known to me. Mothers spoke of wanting deeper relationships with other mothers in the congregation, for companionship, for support, even for guidance. I mentioned this theme to Halcyon, and she gave birth to something new, the circle of mom. I'm not a mom. So appropriately, I've never taken part in those circles, which are open to mothers of children ranging in age from infancy to adulthood. Biological mothers, adoptive mothers, stepmothers, grandmothers. Even though I never shared in their communion of flowers and chocolate enjoyed in those intimate after-dinner gatherings, they changed me. As I witnessed the blossoming of relationships, I noticed that they all started caring for each other fiercely. They started caring for each other's children more profoundly and with greater commitment and less judgment. I've come to see the mothers of the children in this congregation. Bree, Mary, Christine, Julia, Laura, Francesca, Minna, Sage, Nancy, Rose, Jessie, Kelly, Leslie, May, and Halcyon. As not just my peers who happen to be parenting, but as mentors in my role as a bonus parent. They help me see who I am and who I can be, offering guidance, wisdom, and an expectation of accountability. The Circle of Mom is, by extension, a group fiercely parenting kids that they'll likely never meet. And I've come to see all the other women whose children have grown and maybe even made them grandmothers, as mothers to us all. Mothers to a community of people who share a desire to respect everyone, to lovingly observe one another, free from judgment, and to be aware of our place in the world. Thank you to all of you. For many years now, East Shore has shared the loose offering. Everything given during worship not in fulfillment of pledges, with neighboring organizations who share our values, organizations that our members are involved with in some way. We've also been collecting non-perishable food items and toiletries on the first Sunday of each month to deliver to area food pantries. It's been incredible to be better neighbors and to develop partnerships within the community. Today, I'd like to ask you to share what you can with the food pantry program of our friends at Old South Church in Kirtland, where they offer personal care products and food, including meat and dairy, with anyone and everyone they can, no questions asked. For many, especially parents of all genders during this pandemic, it's been a lifeline. You can send your donation to us at East Shore with the words Old South in the memo line of your check, or you can visit Old South Kirtland online. If you are a pledging member or friend of East Shore, I'd also like to remind you to send in your check in fulfillment of your pledge for the year. And if you're new to us, I'd like to thank you now for being here with us. We're glad we have something to offer you that may be of use wherever you are.
John Rouse was a librarian at Oxford University in the 17th century, a friend of Milton. He knew a thing or two about the power of the stories we share. He once said that stories are told as spells for binding the world together. This morning, our benediction for this day honoring mothers is this: May we tell stories that bind the world together. May we tell them with care reflective of their power. May we let them affect us as spells would. May we be mesmerized, enchanted, tested, and transformed. All the while connected to the force that gave us life and nurtured us into being. We join hands in Unitarian Universalist fellowship, pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom which transcends all creeds, not to think alike,
Not to journey together.
but to journey together.
But to journey together.
Okay, that'll do.